Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
Lamarin had just finished dressing. He looked at the big mirror in his dressing room and smiled. He was still a handsome man, even though his hair was gray. He was tall, thin, and elegant, with no belly and a small mustache that was light-colored. He had a special way of walking and a style that made him stand out. He said to himself, "Lamarin is still looking good." Then he went to the living room where his letters were waiting for him. On his table, where everything was in its place, there were about 12 letters. He spread out all the letters like a card player spreading out cards, and he looked at the handwriting, something he did every morning before opening the envelopes. Today, one letter caught his eye. It was simple, but it made him feel uneasy, with a sort of cold feeling in his heart. He thought, "Who can this be from? I know this writing, but I can't remember whose it is." He lifted it up to his face, holding it carefully between two fingers, trying to read through the envelope, without deciding to open it yet. Then he smelled it and picked up a small magnifying glass from the table. He used it to study the handwriting closely. Suddenly, he felt nervous. Who is it from? This writing looks very familiar. I must have seen it many times before, but a long, long time ago. Who can it be from? Oh, it's probably just someone asking for money. He tore open the letter and read, "My dear friend, you have, without doubt, forgotten me, for it is now 25 years since we saw each other. I was young. I am old. When I said goodbye, I left Paris to follow my husband to the provinces. You used to call him my hospital. Do you remember him? He died 5 years ago, and now I am returning to Paris to get my daughter married. I have a daughter, a beautiful girl of 18, whom you have never seen. I told you about her birth, but you probably did not pay much attention to that small news. You are still the handsome Lamarin, so I have been told. Well, if you still remember little Lise, whom you used to call Lyson, come and dine with her this evening, with the elderly Lise, your ever-faithful friend, who, with some emotion, although happy, reaches out to you a devoted hand, which you must clasp, but no longer kiss, my poor Jacklet. Lise." Lamarin's heart started to beat fast. He stayed in his chair with the letter on his knees, staring straight ahead. He felt a strong emotion that made him almost cry. If he had ever loved a woman in his life, it was this one, little Lise, whom he called Ash Flower because of the strange color of her hair and the pale gray of her eyes. Oh! What a lovely, pretty, charming woman she was, this delicate lady, the wife of that sickly baron who had suddenly taken her away to the provinces, locked her up, and kept her hidden out of jealousy of the handsome Lamarin. Yes, he had loved her, and he believed that she had truly loved him too. She called him Jacklet in a sweet way. 1,000 forgotten memories came back to him, far off and sweet and a little sad now. One evening she had visited him on her way home from a ball, and they went for a walk in the Bois de Boulogne. She wore an evening dress, and he wore his dressing jacket. It was springtime. The weather was beautiful. The fragrance from her dress filled the warm air, the smell of her dress, and maybe even the smell of her skin. What a wonderful night! When they reached the lake, as the moon's rays fell across the branches into the water, she began to cry. A little surprised, he asked her why. "I don't know. The moon and the water have affected me. Every time I see poetic things, I feel a tightness in my heart, and I have to cry." He smiled, also feeling emotional, finding her feelings charming, the pure emotions of a simple woman, overwhelmed by everything. And he hugged her tightly, saying, "My little Lise, you are wonderful." What a lovely love affair, short and sweet, it had been. But it ended too quickly, cut short by the old baron, who had taken his wife away and never let anyone see her again. Lomarin had forgotten, in fact, at the end of 2 or 3 months. One woman replaces another so quickly in Paris, when one is a bachelor. But he had kept a small place for her in his heart, for he had loved her alone. He assured himself now that this was true. He stood up and said aloud, "Certainly, I will go and dine with her this evening." And instinctively he turned toward the mirror to look at himself from head to toe. He thought, "She must look very old, older than I look." And he felt pleased at the thought of showing himself to her still handsome, still fresh, surprising her, maybe making her feel emotional, and making her regret those days long ago. He turned his attention to the other letters. They were not important. The whole day he kept thinking of this ghost from the past. What did she look like now? How strange it was to meet this way after 25 years. But would he recognize her? He got ready carefully, put on a white vest, which suited him better with the coat than a black one, sent for the hairdresser to give him a final touch with the curling iron, for he still had his hair, and started very early to show his eagerness to see her. The first thing he saw when he entered the pretty drawing room, which was newly furnished, was his own portrait. It was an old faded photograph from the days when he was handsome, hanging on the wall in an old silk frame. He sat down and waited. A door opened behind him. He stood up quickly and turned around. He saw an old woman with white hair who held out both hands to him. He took her hands, kissed them one after the other many times. Then, lifting his head, he looked at the woman he had loved. Yes, it was an old lady he did not recognize, who smiled but seemed ready to cry. He couldn't help but whisper, "Is it you, Lise?" She replied, "Yes, it is I. It is really me. You wouldn't have known me, would you? I have had so much sorrow, so much sadness. Sadness has taken over my life. Look at me now, or, better, don't look at me. But how handsome you have stayed, and young. If I had met you in the street by chance, I would have shouted, 'Jacklet!' Now, sit down and let's talk first. Then I will call my daughter, my grown-up daughter. You'll see how she looks like me, or rather, how I used to look. No, it's not quite that. She is just like the old me. You shall see. But I wanted to be alone with you first. I feared I would feel emotional at the first moment. Now it is all over. It is past. Please sit down, my friend." He sat down beside her, holding her hand, but he did not know what to say. He did not know this woman. It seemed he had never seen her before. Why had he come to this house? What could he talk about? The past? What was in common between him and her? He could no longer remember anything in front of this grandmotherly face. He could no longer recall all the nice, tender things, so sweet, so sad, that had come to his mind that morning when he thought of the other, of little Lise, of the dainty ash flower. What, then, had happened to her, the old one, the one he had loved? That woman from his far-off dreams, the blonde with gray eyes, the young girl who used to call him Jacklet so sweetly? They sat side by side, not moving, both feeling awkward, troubled, and very uncomfortable. As they talked about simple things, awkwardly and slowly, she stood up and pressed the bell. "I am going to call Renee," she said. There was a knock at the door, then the sound of a dress. Then a young voice said, "Here I am, Mama." Lormerin felt shocked as if he had seen a ghost. He stuttered, "Hello, mademoiselle." Then, turning toward the mother, "Oh, it is you." Yes, it was her, the Lise he had known many years ago, who had disappeared and come back. In Renee, he saw the woman he had loved 25 years before. This one was even younger, fresher, more like a child. He felt a strong urge to open his arms, to hold her close again, whispering in her ear. "Hello, Lyson," a servant announced. "Dinner is ready, madam." And they went to the dining room. What happened at this dinner? What did they say to him, and what could he say back? He felt like he was in a strange dream, almost like he was going crazy. He looked at the two women with one thought in his mind, a strange, confusing thought. Which one is the real one? The mother kept smiling and saying, "Do you remember?" And it was in the bright eyes of the young girl that he found his memories of the past. Many times he almost said to her, "Do you remember, Lyson?" forgetting the old lady with white hair who was looking at him kindly. And yet, there were moments when he no longer felt sure, when he got confused. He could see that the woman today was not exactly the woman from long ago. The old Lise had something in her voice, her eyes, and her whole being that he didn't find again. He tried very hard to remember his old love, to find what had been lost, what this new Lise did not have. The Baron said, "You have lost your old liveliness, my poor friend." He murmured, "There are many other things that I have lost." But in his heart, full of emotion, he felt his old love coming back, like a wild animal waking up, ready to bite him. The young girl kept talking, and every now and then, something in her voice, a way of speaking or thinking like her mother, made Lormerin tremble. These things touched him deeply, making his old feelings bleed again. He left early and walked along the boulevard. But the image of the young girl followed him, haunted him, made his heart beat faster, and his blood warm up. When he was away from the two women, he now saw only one, the young one, the old one come back from the past, and he loved her as he had loved her many years ago. He loved her even more after 25 years. He went home to think about this strange and terrible thing and to decide what to do. But as he was passing with a candle in his hand, in front of the big mirror where he had looked at himself and admired himself before he left, he saw an old, gray-haired man reflected there. Suddenly he remembered what he had been like in the old days, in the days of little Lise. He saw himself as he used to be, charming and handsome, as he had been when he was loved. Then, bringing the light closer, he looked at himself more closely, like looking at something strange with a magnifying glass, seeing the wrinkles, finding the terrible changes that he had not noticed before. And he sat down, feeling crushed at the sight of himself, at the sight of his sad image, murmuring, "It's all over, Lormarin."